Today you'll remember what 1990 was like, and relive the most fabulous moments of an era that will never return. Don't forget to comment on which of these photos touched your soul.
Welcome to Eternal Moments. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start.
In 1991, while the world celebrated German reunification, many in the East mourned the loss of their identity. This image shows a rally for socialism and the GDR, with a heartbreaking banner. "I lost my homeland and never found it again." For these protesters, the fall of the wall didn't bring freedom, but rather uprooting. This is the other side of the story that few want to tell. In 1990, the streets of London became a civic battlefield. Thousands protested against Margaret Thatcher's poll tax, considered unjust and oppressive. What began as a peaceful march ended in one of the most violent riots of the century in the United Kingdom. That night, the rebellion spoke louder than Parliament. In March 1990, Heathrow was a hotbed of emotions and farewells in a Europe that was changing its skin. Between nervous arrivals and eternal embraces, the airport reflected a world in transit. On the cusp of entering the digital age, everything was still written on paper and felt raw. Every flight was a story, not just a destination. In 1990, in the arid lands of South Dakota, history roared from the ground. Sue Hendrickson and Peter Larson pose next to the skull of Sue, the most complete T-Rex ever found, 90% of its skeleton intact. This discovery sparked legal battles, scientific passions, and millions in auctions. A monster from the past that shook the present. In 1990, the world watched as Mohawk warriors defended their ancestral land in the Oka Crisis, Canada. Bravely, they blockaded a golf course that threatened their sacred burial ground. Armed with bows, rifles, and centuries of dignity, they faced the Canadian Army. It was an indigenous cry that shook modern history. In 1990, Matt Groening, just 36 years old, was holding his most famous creation, a small Homer Simpson doll. No one imagined that this yellow cartoon would revolutionize television and become a global icon. With a simple, dysfunctional family, Groening shaped generations. That year, Springfield began to conquer the world. On October 3, 1990, Berlin became an ocean of hugs and tears. After 45 years of separation, Germany was finally reunited, tearing down not only physical walls, but also ideological ones. Citizens from East and West celebrated like reunited brothers. That night, history danced beneath fireworks of freedom. On Victory Day, 1990, Gorbachev and Minister Dmitry Yazov shared a tense smile in Moscow as they honored the triumph over the Nazis. The Soviet Empire was reeling from within. Gorbachev pushed for reforms. Yazov feared collapse. Beneath the parades and medals, the end of an era was already firmly in sight. In the summer of 1990, a young Angela Merkel shared a schnapps with fishermen on the island of Rügen, far from the political spotlight. It was her first campaign as a member of parliament, a modest but determined beginning. Between laughter and seafaring anecdotes, she forged connections that would take her to the top. Thus was born a future chancellor amid waves and schnapps. In 1990, the arrival of McDonald's in Moscow was more than fast food. It was a symbol of change. This elderly woman, biting into her first hamburger, represented a generation discovering a new, Western world. Between wonder and nostalgia, she savored, not just a hamburger, but a bite of history. That day, Russia took a bite out of globalization. In January 1990, young Russians wore their new uniforms and smiled at the first McDonald's in the Soviet Union. More than a job, it was a window to capitalism and Western culture. Between hamburgers and fries, they experienced the collision of two rapidly changing worlds. Thus began a new chapter for Soviet youth in 1990. Trinidad and Tobago experienced a chapter of tension and mystery when soldiers took over the roof of the Guardian Media building. The coup attempt, spearheaded by the Islamist group, Jamaat al-Muslimin, and supported by Gaddafi, shook the island. Amid shadows and sirens, democracy clung to hope. A silent battle that nearly changed the nation's destiny. In 1990, in Lithuania, children played soldiers while closely observing Soviet army exercises. Amid innocent laughter, the backdrop was the tension of an empire on the verge of collapse. Those games had a taste of reality and an uncertain future. Childhood imitated power in a world that was about to change. On January 31, 1990, Moscow bit into its first McDonald's hamburger, an American icon landing in the Soviet Union. More than fast food, it was a symbol of change and openness to the Western world. That endless line reflected the hunger for freedom and modernity, a bite that sealed the end of a closed era in 1990. The British and French put aside rivalries to jointly dig the Channel, a tunnel under the channel that would unite two worlds. Amid laughter, tools, and cultural differences, they built a historic bridge. They weren't just digging earth, but also a new era of European connection and cooperation. Each shovelful brought one continent closer to the other. In March 1990, the Playboy cover captured attention, featuring Karen McDougal and a young Donald Trump. Beyond the glitter and controversy, that image encapsulated the rise of the power and celebrity culture of the 1990s, a moment when spectacle and politics began to intertwine irrevocably. Glamour and ambition in a single photo. In 1990, Budapest experienced a symbolic moment when a man dragged pieces of Stalin's statue after its demolition was legalized. It was the end of an oppressive past and the beginning of a new freedom. Each fallen fragment represented centuries of control and fear finally crumbling. History was written with rubble and hope. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein staged a surreal scene, a birthday party for one of the British hostages in Kuwait. While the world condemned the invasion, he sought to display control and power theatrically. This image reveals the contrast between the cruelty of war and the mask of spectacle, a disturbing moment that defined the conflict. In 1990, the streets of Vilnius displayed a contrast between everyday life and history in motion. While the Soviets were shopping, Lithuanian independence was about to explode. The stores and markets were silent witnesses to a people seeking more than goods. They yearned for freedom. Every purchase was a small act of resistance. On March 11, 1990, Chile experienced a historic milestone when General Pinochet handed over power to President Patricio Aylwin. After 17 years of dictatorship, the nation breathed hope and democracy. This transfer symbolized the end of a dark cycle and the beginning of reconstruction. A day when popular will triumphed over authoritarianism. In January 1990, Baku became a sea of voices, demanding independence and justice. Thousands of Azorias filled the streets with passion and determination, challenging Soviet control. It was a cry for freedom amid tension and fear, a moment that ignited the spark of a new national future. In 1990, Chicago was experiencing the transition between two eras of baseball, the old Comiskey Park still standing, while the new stadium was about to open its doors. What would become U.S. Cellular Field, and today Guaranteed Rate Park, promised modernity and excitement. Between nostalgia and the future, the city celebrated its passion for sports, a changing of the guard in the hearts of its fans. During the Gulf War in 1990, many American families celebrated Thanksgiving with latent uncertainty. While they enjoyed the traditional dinner, news of the conflict filled their screens and hearts. That meal was a moment of unity amid global tension, a reminder of peace in turbulent times. In October 1990, French soldiers patrolled the arid north of Saudi Arabia, prepared for the imminent Gulf War. Under the relentless sun and among endless dunes, they represented the international coalition against the Iraqi invasion. Each step was a show of strength and alliance in distant lands, a war that united nations under the same goal. On August 2, 1990, British Airways Flight 149 landed in Kuwait, unaware that the Iraqi invasion was already underway. Their Boeing 747 was caught in a political and military storm, with 385 passengers unwillingly held hostage. Some remained captive until December, living in fear in an unfamiliar land, a flight that turned into a historic nightmare. In 1990, the Russian Duma was a stage of intense debate and dizzying changes. V.A. Marachev, a member of parliament, discussed legal regulations amid the political transformation shaking the USSR. Every word spoken there sought to define the future of a nation in transition, a key moment between the old order and the new reality. In December 1990, in the cold Red Square, heartbroken Soviet mothers held photos of their sons who had fallen in the Red Army. The state militia restrained them, but their pain and demand for justice broke the silence of power. It was a moment when personal suffering confronted the cold machinery of the state, a silent tribute that called for memory and truth. In early 1990s Poland, a girl immersed herself in the world of Mario thanks to Pegasus, the NES clone that conquered homes. Amid pixelated games and catchy tunes, the fun crossed borders and political systems. That console was a window into a global culture in the midst of transformation. A simple moment, yet charged with nostalgia and change. In 1990, two war legends met in Washington, D.C., Mikhail Kalashnikov, creator of the AK-47, and Eugene Stoner, inventor of the AR-15. In a historic gesture, they held rifles that marked generations and opposing conflicts. It was an encounter between adversaries that defined the face of modern warfare. Two men, two weapons, an indelible legacy. In the early 1990s, Sukhdev Singh Sukha and Harginder Singh Jinda became emblematic figures of the Sikh movement in India, militants and symbols of a struggle that challenged the state. Their actions left a profound and controversial mark. Between controversy and courage, they embodied a turbulent chapter of resistance and conflict. Their names continue to resonate in contemporary history. On April 5, 1990, at the White House, President George H.W. Bush honored Michael Jackson with the Artist of the Decade Award. It was an encounter that united politics and pop culture on a single stage. Jackson, the king of pop, received official recognition for revolutionizing world music, a moment that sealed his legacy in the eyes of history and power. In 1990 Moscow, a Red Army veteran waves his flag as he confronts an anti-communist protester. This image captures the clash of generations and ideals in a country on the brink of radical change. Past and future stare each other down, the tension palpable in the air. A frozen moment where history is debated in every gesture. On July 11, 1990, a Mohawk warrior shakes his rifle after an intense confrontation with Canadian police. This image is symbolic of a fierce struggle for ancestral lands and rights. Amid fire and resistance, Indigenous dignity remains steadfast. A moment of strength and defiance that marked history. In 1990, Boris Yeltsin surprised everyone with an unexpected visit to a Randall's supermarket in Houston, Texas. His astonished expression reflected the culture clash between the Soviet Union and the capitalist world. Amidst aisles filled with products, an uncertain but potentially future loomed. A human moment amid global politics. In August 1990, Václav Havel, the president who led Czechoslovakia to freedom, shared a symbolic stage with the Rolling Stones. The legendary British band brought together 110,000 people in Prague, celebrating the end of communism with music and joy. It was a concert that marked the triumph of democracy and hope, an anthem of freedom resonating throughout Eastern Europe. In 1990, Bill Gates introduced Windows 3.0, a milestone that revolutionized personal computing. with a more user-friendly and powerful graphical interface. Windows opened the door for millions to use computers like never before. It was the beginning of the digital age that would transform homes and offices. A key moment in global technological history, in September 1990. During the Oka crisis in Quebec, 14-year-old Mohawk-Wanique Hornmiller held her sister after she had been wounded by a Canadian bayonet. This image captures the pain and courage of a community fighting for its land and rights. Wanique, a future Olympic medalist, symbolizes strength and resilience in the face of adversity, a moving portrait of youthful courage in turbulent times. Amid the chaos of the Lebanese Civil War, 1975 to 1990, this soldier represents female courage and resilience in a male-dominated conflict. Her steady and determined gaze reveals stories of sacrifice and silent struggle. It was a time when the line between civilian and combatant blurred, an image that speaks of strength and courage in the face of adversity. In 1990, a 106-year-old Armenian woman became a symbol of resilience and love for her land, caring for her home with incredible determination. Despite time and adversity, her spirit remained intact, defying generations and conflicts. This image reflects the ancestral strength that sustains a people, a living testament to history and unwavering courage. In 1990, under a sky blackened by oil well fires, an Iranian soldier surveys the desert with a steady, silent gaze. The flames burned not only the land, but also hope in the midst of the Gulf War. This scene is a portrait of resilience and sacrifice in a landscape marked by destruction, a frozen moment in the struggle to survive and defend. In 1990, Nelson Mandela stood tall in Soweto at a South African Communist Party rally, radiating hope and unity after decades of struggle against apartheid. His presence symbolized the beginning of a new era for South Africa, where freedom was beginning to flourish. Amid applause and dreams, Mandela inspired an entire nation to believe in change. A historic moment filled with emotion and promise. In 1990, a young Hibatullah Akanjada posed for a passport photo that today is the only public image of the future Taliban supreme leader. This image, shrouded in mystery and without independent verification, shows a face before the shadow and power that would mark Afghanistan for decades. A silent portrait that anticipates a history of influence and conflict. In 1990, sacks full of coins were unloaded from the Staatsbank to be melted down, marking the end of an economic era. Each coin, with its history and wear, was transformed into metal ready to be reborn in new forms. She was a tangible symbol of change and financial renewal, a silent process that transformed the past into the future. In 1990, Linda Carter was still the real Wonder Woman, winning hearts with her charisma and strength. Beyond the costume, she was an icon of female empowerment in an era seeking new heroines. Her image radiated confidence and hope for an entire generation, an eternal symbol of courage and grace. In 1990, Margaret Thatcher descended the steps of 10 Downing Street after losing the leadership of the Conservative Party, closing an era marked by her iron grip. The Iron Lady left power amid applause and controversy, a symbol of a transformed and divided United Kingdom. That image captures a moment of decline and an indelible legacy. The end of a political chapter that changed British history. In 1990, Universal Orlando Resort opened its doors, promising fun and magic for the whole family. Between roller coasters and unforgettable characters, a destination was born that revolutionized entertainment. That day marked the beginning of adventures that millions would enjoy for generations. A new world where fantasy and reality intersected. In 1990, Moscow witnessed the last major parade of intercontinental ballistic missiles, paying tribute to the Bolshevik Revolution. It was a parade charged with power, but also with nostalgia and tension in the face of a crumbling empire. The enormous missiles gleamed in the sun, recalling a past of strength and fear. a symbolic closing of an era that would soon come to an end. After the Battle of Dasman Palace in August 1990, Kuwait was marked by violence and destruction. Ruined buildings and deserted streets recount the impact of the Iraqi invasion. This silent scene bears witness to the brutal clash between military forces and the local resistance, an image that reflects the human and material cost of the war. In 1990, the streets of Tokyo were filled every morning with legions of office workers going about their daily routine. Suits, briefcases, and focused faces depicted the discipline and frenetic pace of a booming city. This image captures the essence of Japanese urban life, between tradition and modernity, an everyday moment that reveals the human machinery behind progress. In the midst of the economic crisis in Russia in the 1990s, this image shows how teachers received bottles of vodka instead of wages, a harsh and surreal reality that reflected the collapse of the system and the struggle to survive. Between teaching and alcohol, education faced an unexpected challenge, a stark symbol of chaotic times and silent sacrifices.